Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us in BK201. I'm Chef Jeannie Stevenson, joined with Chef Genevieve. We are your instructor and evaluator this term. So thanks so much for coming to this live session, number 1, at noon Central Time. We're always going to have these live sessions on Wednesday at noon Central. And of course I record it, so if you can't join, you can watch the archive too, but we're going to be going over lots of information, and hopefully we're going to be discussing things as well. So this is super important that you pay attention, and that you don't just have us on in the background as background noise. Okay, and participate in the chat group as well. You can talk to your classmates too. But just a little bit about myself. I have been a chef, a pastry chef, since 2002. And I have been teaching for the past 6, almost 7 years. And this is my favorite thing to do. I love to teach students. I especially love meeting all kinds of new people. This job over the past 6 years, I've made so many more friends than I had before I started teaching, and I love meeting people and talking about food and all things pastry related. So I'm always willing to chat with you guys, even if it's not about school assignments and stuff. So anything that you want to reach out about, like cakes or pastries or whatever you want to talk about, you can drop me a line, text me, or whatever. And I would like to say that you're welcome to ask as many questions as you feel like asking. And we want to be as informative in our response as possible. Especially me, I like to relay as much information to be efficient too. I'm not trying to be extremely wordy in my responses to you, so don't ever feel like I'm being snarky or sharp or short with you guys. I'm just trying to be like brief and to the point, with also trying to be informative too, but I'm not like interjecting any attitude, and so don't feel discouraged or anything asking questions. When you do reach out to me and Chef Genevieve, you should make sure to introduce yourself, tell us what class you're in, and announce your question before you ask the question. So you could say, "This is Jennifer, I'm in BK201, and regarding my week 1 assignment, blah, 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 blah." Don't just say, "Hey, chef, how do I do this? I'm confused," because we're also confused at that point. Okay? Does that make sense? Good. All right, so let's talk about this class. We are in contemporary pastry. We've got 12 weeks. Our last 2 weeks are kind of combined into 2, so it's more like 11.5 weeks instead of 12 weeks. We've got jam, we've got farm-to-table desserts where you're going to be utilizing a locally sourced product. So we're going to ask you to go out into your city and try to find something that was locally produced, like fruit or something from the farm, or whatever. If you're making a savory dish, it could even be meat. But anyway, week 3 we've got gluten-free, then we do vegan, and then we start working on international desserts and then plated desserts, and your final project is a plated dessert trio. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because you can start thinking about that. You can move forward in the class and kind of browse through all the different weeks, look at the different assignments, and then notice that the last couple weeks are plated desserts, and you could be utilizing product that you made earlier in the term. So for example, this week you're making jam. If you want to set some aside into a separate container and save it for the weeks to come, you can always be, taking things that you created earlier in the term and use them on your plated desserts later as a part of your dessert, or as a garnish or a sauce or something. Okay, so it's important to know that you can do that, but when you're submitting your assignments, you want to show us the pictures. The pictures of the things that you created. Even if it was something you created weeks and weeks ago, we still want to see that photographic evidence too. So save all your photos and save some product if you can. Okay? Does anybody have anything super interesting to say before we get started? Anybody want to introduce yourselves or tell us about you and what you like to do and what you hope to get out of this class?
I love this class, you guys. I think something that we do a lot of in this class is we really start to talk about dollar signs. Up till now, we've been working on a ton of different techniques each week. And in this class, we're still going to be learning specific techniques, but we also have sort of broader lessons overall. Gluten-free. We're going to talk about specific gluten-free products, but also what it means to include gluten-free products on your menu as a whole. Same goes for vegan. International baking is such a huge category, and we only get 2 weeks to spend on it. So I think something that's really cool about this class in particular is that we get to dive into some advanced business talk where you get to see how these techniques and assignments could be applied in the industry to make you more money. Jam is definitely one of them. Jam can be a huge moneymaker. It's a simple product. You can make it in large batches, sell it on its own. Its shelf life is longer, so it's wonderful for things like filling donuts, pastries, flavoring ice cream. It can be really, really versatile. So we're going to talk about a lot of those things each week, how you can make these techniques make you money.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's something that I try to think about all the time when I'm instructing, is to make sure that you're always seeing this product as dollar signs. Dollar signs, especially for those of you who are going into business for yourself. Working for yourself can actually be a lot more expensive than working in an actual restaurant or bakery, because you're not able to get a lot of the product at wholesale. So thinking about everything that we make in terms of dollar signs is really helpful moving forward. And if you're not costing out your formulas when you make them, it's a good habit to get into at this point, to start costing things out and putting that into your brain of, oh yeah, I made this cake or whatever it was that we made and it cost me $8. How much can I sell it for? Things of that nature. So anyway, I'm going to jump into the class page, and we can look at the syllabus real quick, and we can look at the important reminders and deadlines, and then we'll move on with the actual content of the week. So I'll begin screen sharing you the class page, and I do have it set up in student mode, so it looks like what you look at when you open your computer. I've got on the top of the class page, I've got some important reminders and some makeup assignment information, but first we'll start with the syllabus. I'm going to briefly talk about the syllabus, which you should already be familiar with. But the first page of the syllabus just talks about what you're going to be learning in class, so make sure you read through that so you can be aware of what is to come. And then you have the grade breakdown. Most importantly, you have your lab assignments, your weekly food creations, quizzes, also known as knowledge checks. This one here, we have to get rid of this. This is not part of what we're doing. This was kind of like a final buffet project, but just kind of scratch that out in your mind. We're not doing that. You've got your final exam and you've got your discussion forums. I would like to discuss the discussion forums for a second, and just ask you to please make sure that you're actually completing the discussion forums. That stood in the way of several people passing last term. They didn't do the discussion, and that was kind of make or break with their grade. They're easy and they're fun. It's educational. You just go in there and you make your initial post. You've already had 2 classes at this point, so you should be familiar with how that works. I am going to require that you actually have some content to your post, and it's more than just a couple sentences. So next week and week 3, when you have those discussions due, we'll talk more about what my requirements are for that. Basically, it comes down to just more than like, I agree, good idea, things like that. We want to see some actual thought processes going into your discussion forums. But anyway, do make sure that you're completing those, because they're worth 15% of your grade. And like I said before, it can stand in between you either passing or failing the class. Okay? So make sure you're looking at your syllabus. You've got important reminders here. All assignments, as usual, are due on Tuesdays at midnight, roughly. You should have your initial discussion posted by Saturday. and then your replies are due. So the entire discussion itself is due by Tuesday night at midnight, but you should try, it's best practice to have your initial discussion posted by the Saturday before that it's due. Weeks 11 and 12 of this class are going to be combined. So our final session is going to be Wednesday, December 11th. We will not have the session the following week, but since I'm going to be in live session mode anyway that day, just because I have another class to teach, I'll probably be on the computer, and I'm going to offer an extra session for anybody who needs to ask last minute questions, but it will not be required. Okay. And then the last day of class is a Thursday, and all that work, your final assignment, is going to be due that night, Thursday night. So it's a little bit different than what you're used to, but it's no big deal. It's just a Thursday instead of a Tuesday. So look at it as you have an extra 2 days to work on your project. Instead of turning it on Tuesday, you're going to turn it in on Thursday by midnight, roughly. Okay.
The thing about that deadline, you guys, is that Chef Jeannie and I, our bosses' need us to have our grades completed and turned in shortly after that Thursday deadline. So unlike the rest of the class where we have that late period, and sometimes there are things that we can do, there is no late period for that very last deadline. Your final project, there's not a late period beyond that Thursday, December 9th deadline. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, definitely remember that once you hit that deadline and your assignment's not in, even if it's other assignments, like you missed other assignments, you can't turn those in after class is closed either. So once Thursday night at midnight rolls around, we're done. We're grading and grades are going in. So under the important reminders, we have some information about makeup assignments. You have 3 opportunities in this class to turn in missed work. So we've got 3 makeup slots all the way down at the bottom of the class page, right here, 1, 2, 3. So you've got 3 options to do that. And there is a deadline. So the deadline for that is Tuesday night, December 17th at 11:59 p.m. Just like everything else, it's Tuesday night. Okay, you can't turn them in later than that. But please don't wait until December 17th to turn in late work. If you missed week 2 and week 5 and week 6, try to turn them in on week 7 and week 8. Don't wait until the last minute, because that's not going to help you out, especially not with your final project coming due at the same time. Okay? And if you have an assignment that received a low grade and you want to try again, you can do that too as a makeup. But again, there is a deadline for that.
And by low grade, we mean 59% or less. So if you turned in an assignment late and you got an 85, you can't resubmit that assignment as a makeup to try and earn those 15 points back. So that's the assignments that are eligible for makeup are missed assignments or ones that you received a 59% or less on. They are yours to use how you choose, but you only have 3 of them. So I would recommend holding on to them for emergencies. That way, when something, we all know life comes up. If something comes up, you have that makeup slot to utilize still.
Yep. Yeah, I have a lot of students ask me if they're allowed to submit a makeup assignment, and you don't really need my permission. I think it says in the syllabus that, as chef's discretion, but you don't need our permission. Just turn it in, when you want to use one of those slots. But like Chef Genevieve said, you only have 3, and you should save them for emergencies, not just because an assignment was late. It's probably better to take the 15% deduction on a late assignment than to just use a makeup slot, because you never know what's going to pop up in the future to the point where you're going to need those. Then you have your class cafe, and this is a place where you can talk with your classmates, share photos, and talk about class and anything, pastry and dessert related. If you have questions for either me or Chef Genevieve, I ask that you contact us directly. We are going to be popping in and out of there occasionally, but it's not really a place to ask the chefs questions. You have our text, you have our email, our phone numbers, so you can ask us questions directly. Class Cafe is more of a place for you to socialize in an educational setting with your classmates. And you can put your pictures of your assignments in there and compare and contrast with your classmates as well. But do remember, it's not a competition either. It's not like we're in there trying to compete with each other as who's, you know, puff pastry came out the best or anything. So, but yeah, you should definitely use that. So we've got many assignments this week, or this term. We've got like 11 of them, and they get a little bit more complicated as we go. This week we have jam, okay? And then the next week we've got the locally sourced product, and then gluten-free and vegan. So you really have to kind of plan. I want you all to look at the class page and go through the assignments and think about what we're going to be asking you to do, and if you need to start sourcing your ingredients sooner than later. Like, for example, in the BK201 class I'm teaching right now, our previous week's assignment was phyllo dough, which might not be the easiest thing for some people to get. I know there's a lady who lives in the Caribbean, and they just got hit with a big storm, so she wasn't able to get it right away. She got it eventually, but her assignment's going to be late. So they just look through the class page and think about things like that. Kind of anticipate, you know, the future assignments. So we've got all that. Your final assignment is a dessert trio, which I'm just going to kind of show you real quick. It is, sorry, that's not the right page, but it is a student choice. So that's going to be something that you can decide whatever you want to make. It's a small plate of 3 desserts, and we'll talk more about that in the future, but kind of be thinking ahead on that. Just like I said before, you maybe want to save some of the things that you're creating week to week to use in the future, sauces, cookie batters, things of that nature. Okay, and then down at the bottom of the class page, under the makeup assignment slot, you also have some extra credit options. The second option is just completing the end of course survey, and that's not going to be available until I think 3 days before class ends. But all you have to do is take the survey, and that's it. You don't have to put anything in this folder. As a matter of fact, I'm going to hide this folder just so nobody actually puts anything in there. I'm also going to hide the other folder, and then when you have your extra credit assignment done, you can tell me, and then I'll open it up and you can submit it in there. But we don't want people just like submitting random assignments into those folders. But again, for the extra credit course survey, you're just going to take the survey and that's it. I'll look at the activity completion reports and then I'll give you the credit for it. And this one here, you're going to watch one of these food-related movies. You could watch The Kings of Pastry on YouTube for $3. You could get Grace on Netflix. I'm sure everybody has Netflix, but if you don't, there's also a YouTube option. There's an Amazon Prime option. So if you have, you know, computer accessibility, you can at least watch the one from YouTube. And all I'm asking you to do is watch the video and then write a 300-word synopsis of what it was about, how you felt about it, and just kind of write a movie review about what was happening in the movie. Pretty easy, and that'll bump up your grade to, you know, at the end, if you've got like a 58 and you need a 60 to pass, turning in both of those extra credit assignments will get you the 60% that you need. It's not going to bump your grade up from like a 50 to a 60, but it will give you that little bump if you need it, and every little bit helps, right? But nobody's planning to fail, right? Nobody's going to get less than a 95% in this class, right? Shooting for the stars. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I don't want anybody to fail, but you know, if you feel like you're not doing that well, make sure you get those extra credits done. And they're located all the way at the bottom of the page. All right. What do you think? Questions, comments, concerns, insults? No?
First week was quiet.
With that?
First week where everybody's quiet. That's fair.
Don't be quiet. You can say stuff.
You guys are going to wish I was quiet. You're going to hear so much of my voice over these next 12 weeks.
I wish you were quiet. You need to pipe down. You need to pipe down over there.
My parents, my teachers, I think my chefs, every person I've ever known in life has wished I was quiet.
No, I like it. I like working with you. I like having a partner who, you know, participates. It's better than not, you know. I like having an evaluator because for the past 6 years I've been teaching on my own, and having a co-host is always better than not having a co-host. I need somebody to bounce things off of, and this is the way to do it. Anyway, let's talk about what's happening in week 1. Okay. Week 1, preserving in the season. So this week you are doing a jam assignment. Jam is, that stuff that you spread on your toast. So we're looking at the assignment page. Some of you may have looked at it before today. I updated it in this little purple section right here. I'm going to just talk about that real quick. You do not have to process canning jars. You don't have to get those ball jars from Walmart. You don't have to put your jam in there and boil it and then put the lids on and make sure it's all sealed up. You don't have to do that. All we're asking you to do is make the jam, show us what it looks like smear it on a plate so we can see what the viscosity is like and the texture, and then put it in some kind of container like Tupperware or whatever and label it for storage. That's all you need to do. If you want to go through with the canning process, that's purely up to you, but you do not have to do that for this project. Okay, so we need to see your self-ID photo as usual, your mise en place, sanitizing bucket. Those are the 3 things that people commonly leave out of their assignments, which is what makes their grade go down below 60 points or 60%. Okay, so don't forget that part. We want to see the jam during the cooking process, and that's just real easy. Just take a picture of while it's bubbling away in the pot. Then you can show us the jam on the back of a spoon to show us the viscosity, show us that it's thick enough that it's not falling off the back of a spoon. And then you can think about it creatively, like how should you present the jam? Should I just show it on the back of a spoon, or should I maybe put it on something? Do I have a muffin or a biscuit to put it on? Maybe you baked a biscuit, or spread it across a slice of bread or something, or do something even more creative with it, like pipe it into a little tart shell, or put it on a cookie, like a Linzer cookie. Or there's so many things that you can do with jam. It doesn't just have to be on the back of a spoon. Jam could even go on meat. You could spread a cherry jam on the back of a pork roast or something, sweet and savory. Okay, so be creative with your presentation. We're going to be looking for that in the coming weeks, more than just a slice of cake on a plate. We want to see some creativity.
Another reason to be doing that, to be pushing your presentations, is because you guys are getting closer to the end now, right? You're getting closer to your externship. So that means every single week is an opportunity to update your portfolio with pictures that you're really proud of. When I went hunting for my externship, all of my photos were school photos. So that's something to keep in mind. Something that I like to do is I like to use the term magazine cover. So if I'm having a hard time finding inspiration for maybe a product that's a bit more simple, like pancakes or jam, I'll type magazine cover jam into Google, and I will see all of these beautiful pictures of jars next to flowers and spoons and all these other little details, but that make that jam look incredibly enticing. So absolutely use the internet, use resources, use social media. Hashtag jam on social media, check out other people's pictures. But every week, even for simple products like jam, that is really an opportunity for you guys to show off, to show us what you've got, to show us that your skill, to show your future chefs and your future employers the types of things that you learned while you were here at Escoffier.
That's very true. The portfolio is super important, especially for pastry students. I've never known of a pastry student getting a job without having to provide a portfolio to the potential employer. That's probably the first thing that they ask for in addition to your resume is, do you have a portfolio? And you want to be able to say yes. And then you want it to be, a working portfolio of things that you've made throughout your education and improved on. Obviously the portfolio from week 1 is going to look a lot different than it will from week 36. But that's something you should for sure be working on right now, is keeping a portfolio. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on paper. You don't have to print it out, but you can have it, a digital. emailable portfolio, just the same way you send us the links in your assignments. You can send those to employers. But anyway, be creative with your assignments. Show us more than just the jam on the back of the spoon. Now, I will say that the requirements are just that for this assignment. So if you can't, you ran out of time, or you can't afford anything extra, whatever, that's fine. But we are encouraging you to be as creative as possible, and definitely Google pictures of the product that you're making and look at ways other people are presenting it. Somebody asked in the chat room, what if we already have jars? Super. You can put the jam in the jars and just take a picture of it that way, and your portfolio is going to look better than just smearing it across a plate. You don't have to go through the canning process, but you can put it in the jars and take a picture of it.
Something that's important to me, whether you do the canning process or not, no matter what container you put your jam in, I need to see it properly labeled. Labeling is something I take super seriously, especially as small business owners. Labeling will save you so much money. More importantly, it keeps you and your customers safe. So labeling is really, really crucial. So regardless of if you go do the entire canning process or you just put it in some Tupperware, I need to see that it's properly labeled. So that you'll see that that's number 11 of your required photos. So make sure that you're showing me that.
Yep.
And to me, a proper label means the date it was made, what the product is. You can take it a step farther by putting a use by date. But if you list the day that it was made, that meets the requirements.
Yep. Yeah, you can see in step 6 that I say you do not have to do the canning jar process. You can skip directly to step 11. But if you want to do the process, you can. That's purely up to you. So let's take a look at the formula for the jam. One of the most common questions I get is, what type of fruit can we use? Because it's calling for berries. You can use any kind of berries. They can be fresh or they can be frozen berries, also known as IQF berries. Does anybody know what IQF stands for? Individually quick frozen. That's just a little bit of culinary trivia that's good to know. Individually quick frozen. It also doesn't have to be berries. You could use a different type of fruit. You could even use a vegetable if you want to make a veggie jam. Make it a savory type of thing. So anything that you can make jam with, like fruit or vegetable related, you can go ahead and do that. We don't really want to see like meat jams, but fruits and vegetables. Any fruit you want, fresh or frozen, any vegetable you want. Just make sure that it tastes good. Right? And
consider if it has seeds in it or not. I often see raspberry jam with a ton of seeds in it left overwards. So there are ways to get those seeds out. You can strain your finished jam to remove the seeds, but you want to consider that too when you're choosing your fruit if it's something that has a ton of seeds in it.
Yeah. Especially raspberries and blackberries, the seeds tend to be bitter when you cook them. I know that when you eat fresh raspberries and blackberries, it doesn't taste bitter, but during the cooking process, it's like there's something that comes out of those seeds. And then there's so many of them that it just has this like really bitter flavor that you probably don't want. But anyway, you need berries, you need granulated sugar, a little bit of salt, and a little bit of lemon juice. That's it. Sure, you can use some other type of citrus juice, but what we're looking for in this recipe is the acidity, because the acidity, not only is it going to brighten the flavor of your product, but it's also going to help in the gelling process. Fruits and vegetables have something in them known as pectin, which is basically part of the cell walls of the plant, and when you cook it and then it cools down, the product thickens up. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but the acidity from the lemon juice or the orange juice, whatever you're using, is going to help cause it to gellify more than it would if you didn't have that citrus juice. So you're going to combine all of the ingredients in a sauce pot, and I would suggest using a stainless steel sauce pot if you have it, but a nice heavy pot will do. Cook the mixture, stirring often, so the berries can soften, especially if they're frozen, they need to thaw out. They're going to start to soften, they're going to release their juices. The juices are going to start to thicken as the water evaporates. and it could take up to 15 or 20 minutes. Now, if you are using frozen fruit, it's going to take a little bit longer because there's going to be some water, you know, attached to the fruit itself, you know, that kind of like icy coating that frozen fruit has. So it'll probably take a little bit longer with frozen fruits or vegetables. And that's it. You just cook it for 15 or 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. Allow it to come up to room temperature. And then you want to put it into a container with a lid and label it, just like Chef said. And then put it in the refrigerator. And that's pretty much it for that formula. It's super easy. We're going to watch a video in just a second.
I want to chime in with just a couple of tips for this particular recipe. With that 15 to 20 minutes, some of you might choose fruit that have a much higher water content than others. So that 15 to 20 isn't a hard science. I want you guys to use your visual indicators. Have the bubbles that are the boiling bubbles, have they slowed down? Have they gotten larger? Is your fruit looking more like it's coated in that jam as opposed to floating in a liquid? So while those times are there and they're wonderful suggestions, make sure you're still using other visual indicators as well to decide when your jam's ready to come off the stovetop. And then as far as letting your jam come down to room temperature before you put it in a container, that's super, super important. Not only do you not want to lower the temperature of your fridge by putting a hot product in there, but you don't want to put a hot product in a jar or container and then put a lid on it. You're going to create a moist, warm environment, and there's nothing bacteria loves more than a warm and moist environment. So letting your product cool completely before you're putting it into a container.
That's very true. Another thing is that you want to make sure that you're using a super clean container for this. I would recommend cleaning it with soap and water and then pouring some boiling water on it to kind of sanitize it. And the last thing you should not do is don't dip your finger into it. Because as soon as you do that and you store it for a few weeks, when you take the lid off, you're going to notice the entire top of it is covered in mold and like a weird, like pinkish liquid almost, because it's been contaminated with bacteria. Even if you think your hands are clean, if you want to taste it after you put it, you know, in the container after you've cooked it, dip a clean spoon or fork in there. Do not dip your finger in there because it's going to cause it to mold. And if you had saved it for later use in the term, you can't use it if it's all moldy. Okay, and just like Chef said about the amount of water in the fruit, that goes, you know, across the board. Look for those other visual indicators. Make sure that it's not burning. You know, there's a lot of sugar in this formula, and the fruit has natural sugars too. So you might be cooking it for 15 to 20 minutes, and you're like, this is bubbling like crazy, and it's steaming, and it's starting to smell like it's burning. Take it off, you know, take it off. You might have been cooking a really dry fruit. You know, if you're making a banana jam, for example, somebody did that in the term that I'm currently teaching, that's going to take less time because that's not a very wet fruit at all, okay? And then something like pineapple will take more time because it is super wet. Questions? I have a video to play on how to make this jam, and then I have a little slideshow that we can go through that talks about the different types of jams and jellies and the canning process too, and it's also got some good information on pectin and all that kind of stuff.
A jam is a simple and flavorful supporting element that can be used as a sauce or a garnish for a variety of dishes. As the berries cook, their water evaporates and the sugar thickens, leaving behind a very pure, concentrated flavor. Because it's made from fresh ingredients, making jam from scratch is a far cry from anything available in the grocery store. To start off, combine all your ingredients in a large saucepan and turn the heat up to medium. And then we're going to gently stir. Cook the mixture until the berries soften and the juices thicken. This process can take about 15 to 20 minutes or so. Be sure to keep an eye out as it can scorch. So once the mixture comes to a boil, you can start to see the bubbles are very sporadic. And then as it starts to thicken and all those little sugars start to gelatinize in here, you'll see the bubbles start to slow down a little bit. So they actually start to thicken the whole process. Once the mixture has reached the ideal consistency, remove it from the heat and allow it to reach room temperature. A jam will keep for a few weeks if kept refrigerated and sealed. It can be added to layer cakes, cheese plates, or packaged and sold at bake shops. Because freshly made jam has a superior flavor and texture than store-bought options, it can be an impressive addition to your pastry skill set.
That looks easy enough, right?
And again, you guys, jam is big money. So I live on the western slope of Colorado, and something that the western slope is famous for, and it surprises most people, is peaches. We have something called Palisade peaches. People that pay big money to have those peaches shipped all over the place. But I can't tell you how many people support themselves here almost year-round based on the sales of their jams and other jarred products. So there's definitely money to be made when it comes to learning the process of canning, learning how to create your own jams, cook down fruits, cook products in a way that's going to give them a longer shelf life. There's a ton of different ways to make jam turn into dollar signs. So again, even though it's sort of a simple product, it's definitely something that's versatile, worth knowing how to do. You guys now know how easy it is to swap out, to keep it seasonal. So let's say in the summertime you have a bunch of peaches available to you and you're making peach jam, but maybe in the winter you're making sweet potato jam or sweet potato butter and jarring that and selling that. It's a product that you can definitely keep seasonal throughout the year. So I actually think that it's one of my favorite things to have in the shop. I end up using it all the time for, like I mentioned before, filling little pastries, maybe adding some flavor or putting it in between layers of cake. It can be super useful.
That is true. I worked for a restaurant in Chicago, in downtown Chicago, where they utilized canned products, especially jam, all year long. So in January, we were using things that we made through the canning process back in June and July. It was really neat. It's interesting to know how to make this, and it's also versatile to use, to sell on your own at farmers markets and in local stores, as well as in restaurants. Restaurants use, canned products as well. I was just at a local general store the other day, which was more of a tourist trap than anything else, but I did notice that they had a huge selection of jams and jellies and other canned products, and I was wondering about that. And I was noticing that they're all local vendors. Some people from right here where I live in Raleigh, and other people in close parts of North Carolina. But I thought that was really interesting. And just like Chef said, it's a great way to supplement your income just by getting some fruit and cooking it down and put it in the jars. It's more complicated than that. We're going to show you the canning process in my slideshow in just a minute, but it's not that hard, and it's a pretty easy and cheap way to make some extra income. And you can also cross utilize it if you're using if you have like a cottage bakery. You can use it in your cakes and whatnot, and your pastries if you're catering for weddings, and there's all sorts of things that you can use your canned jam for too. So let's look at the slideshow. On the class page, it's called That's My Jam. So you've got a bunch of different types of canned fruit products. Jelly, the number one, is made from juice. So there's no whole fruit in that one, but it's pretty much the same process. You're cooking the juice a little bit, and you're adding some pectin to it and sugar to make it sweet and jellified. Jam is the one that we're working on. It's more of a crushed fruit type of thing. We're not actually adding any extra pectin to it, but you could if you wanted to, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Preserved, they have more of whole fruits instead of smaller chunked up fruits. There it's more of like, if you reach in there with a spoon, you're going to end up with larger chunks coming out. Marmalades are made from citrus peels, so kind of like a jam, except it's made with the citrus peels, an orange or a lemon, even grapefruit, you can do that. Fruit butters are a little bit different. They're more pulpy and they're kind of spreadable. You don't generally find those with chunks in them. One of the most common ones is apple butter and pear butter in the fall. And then you have conserves, which is a mixture of 2 or more types of preserves. So these are the basics. These are the basic ingredients. You've got your fruit, okay? Of course, that's going to provide the flavor. And another thing that the fruit has is the natural pectin in it. Okay, that's what's going to cause it to get thick. Not just by the reduction process, but the pectin is an actual, part of the cell structure of that fruit. And when it's heated and then cools, it causes it to thicken up just like gelatin would if you put gelatin in something. You should not use fruit that has visible signs of spoilage, because that means that the cells have broken down so much that they've lost some of their pectin. The more ripe a fruit product is, the less pectin it's going to have. So let's say you were making a strawberry jam this week with strawberries that were super fresh that came right off the vine versus strawberries that had been sitting around for several days. The riper something is, the less natural pectin it's going to have. As it ripens, the cell walls are breaking down and it's losing that natural pectin. Keep that in mind, because you might be following the same formula, making the recipe a couple different times, wondering why it's thicker the first time or the second time and it wasn't thick another time. It could be due to the ripeness of the product. Okay, then you've got your sugar, which is going to aid in the sweetness too. And one of the most important things that it does is it prevents the growth of microorganisms. Sugar is I keep clicking on that. Sugar is an antimicrobial. It's going to help prevent it from growing bacteria and mold. Okay, and then you have to have the proper sugar to pectin ratio in order to help, or in order for your jam to thicken up too. You can't just put way more sugar or way less sugar in your jam, because that could either prevent it from gelling or it could gel too much if you don't have the right amount of sugar. Okay. Granulated white sugar is the type that we generally use for jams, unless it calls for something else. Some call for liquid inverted sugar like corn syrup or honey, but usually it's granulated sugar. And then last, you have the acid that's needed for the gel formation. Depending on what type of fruit you're using will determine how much acid you need. You might need more in underripe fruits. Lemon juice is usually the one that we use, and it also contributes some flavor and tartness. Lemon juice is known for brightening flavor of certain fruits and vegetables, so that's another, one of the reasons why we have that in our jam. So these are the basic ingredients in your jam. Now, talking about the pectin, you can actually buy that at the store. Not only does it come in the fruits and vegetables that you're using, but you can also get extra pectin. If you were to make a recipe, let's say you made the formula today with raspberries or blueberries or something, and you thought, this just isn't thickening up enough. I've made it 3 times, and each time it just seems too loose. You can add some extra pectin. A lot of formulas call for extra pectin, in addition to other types of pastries and confections too, and candies that use pectin. But it's kind of a thickener, like gelatin, but it doesn't give you that really like jelly quality. It gives you more of like a smooth thickness rather than something that's being super glued together like gelatin does. But here's a little information about what it is. This might be what it looks like when you buy it at the grocery store. You can also get it at the hardware store, because the hardware store sells canning products. If you were to order it commercially, like if you worked in a bakery or a restaurant, it might look like this when it arrives to you. But for those of you who want to shop for it in the grocery store, you're looking for something like that in the box. Pectin comes in different levels and different types of fruit. Also, like I said, depending on the ripeness of the fruit. Here's some information about what types of fruit have higher levels, moderate levels, and lower levels. So you can browse through that, take a look. I don't know what type of jam you're planning to make this week, but this will give you some more information about how thick you can expect it to get due to the natural pectin in the product. So there's a couple different tests you can do. I don't suggest that you do that this week. We'd just like you to make the jam and present it. But in the future, if you want to kind of test in your jam making, if you want to test it to see, you know, how much pectin it has, you can cook it. You can boil it until it covers a spoon, and then pour the jelly into a bowl and then just kind of test it that way. There's also this other one that you're not supposed to eat. This is the alcohol test. Basically, you're taking some juice and some rubbing alcohol, shaking it in a closed container, and if it gels and you can pick it up with a fork, you can tell that that product has a lot of natural pectin in it. And the less it gels, the less pectin that it has. So here's some information about the canning process. I have some, I'm going to fast forward real quick to, I thought I had a full list of equipment, but I guess I don't. Anyway, you've got jars. You need to wash them thoroughly, boil them to remove any bacteria that's present, and dry the jars just by drying them at room temperature. You don't want to dry them with a rag or a paper towel, because just doing that could add bacteria or mold to it. So you don't want to touch them with anything. Just let them dry upside down at room temperature so they can drain and dry fully. Same thing goes for the lids. You need to make sure that you clean the lids and you sanitize them the same way. That's what this stuff says here. You're going to clean them and heat them in boiling water to sanitize them. You would fill the jars with your hot jam or jelly product and avoid getting any on the rim of the jar.
So this is different. I know I clarified earlier to you guys to let it cool, but this is specific to the proper canning process, pouring that hot base into your jar.
Yeah, and again, you do not have to do this step. This is just some extra information for those of you who want to learn a little bit more about canning. So once you're done cooking your jam and it's hot, 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 you're going to pour it into the jar, and you're going to leave at least a 1/4 inch of space. You don't fill it all the way to the top. I would leave a little bit more space than a 1/4 inch, but you want to avoid getting it on the edge of the jar and the rim. That's because when you put the lid and the seal on, it's not gonna form a seal if there's something lingering on the edge. Okay, so you would wipe the jar rims with a clean paper towel if need be, but I would just avoid that altogether by not getting anything on the rim. Then you would put the lids on according to the manufacturer's instructions. Tighten the bands. That's like the little screw top on top. Next step is to boil the jars. And boiling the jars is what's going to cause that to have a vacuum seal. You know that when you heat something really, really hot and then you put a lid on it, it creates a vacuum, like it starts to suction, and it's going to be almost impossible to get that lid off unless you break that seal. So it's really important that you don't skip this step. You're not just going to pour the hot jam into the jars and then, you know, put the lid on. You have to actually boil it. And then you would use this handy jar lifter, which is coated in rubber, to pull the jars out of the water. Place the lid on top, place the lid on the canner in the pot, bring the water to a full boil for 5 minutes, depending on what type of jars you're using. But you always want to follow the manufacturer's instructions, because depending on the brand of the jar will determine how long you're supposed to boil it. Some brands are different. Some say 5 to 10 minutes. I've even seen some jars say up to 25 to 30 minutes if it's like an older or thicker glass. And then you're going to pull them out of the water and let them cool. Sometimes you can leave them in the water for 5 minutes before pulling them out, but that just makes it easier to get them out of the water when it's not fully boiling. And you want to use your jar lifter. I would avoid putting your hand in there unless you had one of those heat-proof rubber gloves, like welding gloves almost. And then you're going to cool them at room temperature for 12 hours without touching them. Because when you touch them, it's going to disturb the sealing process. As these cool down, that's what's going to pull the lid tight onto the top of the can and create that vacuum seal. The vacuum is what you hear when it pops when you open the lid. Okay, so you don't want to disturb it. Now, some older older practices suggest turning the cans upside down during the canning process, but the USDA does not recommend that because it can actually create a false seal. Like when you turn it upside down, it's going to kind of stick naturally because it's upside down, and you might think that it's sealed, but it's not. So the best practice is to leave them right side up for 12 hours as they're cooling, and then it's naturally going to create that vacuum, and then you'll know that it's sealed, and then you can tighten the screw top lids on. Has anybody ever tried canning anything at home? Some people have.
Terry down in the chat was mentioning that they've done pickling, doing the canning process for pickling, which is one of my favorite examples of the canning process, is pickling different things. Pickled green beans is one of my favorite snacks.
So then you're going to check the seal and remove the ring bands if you don't want to store them with the ring bands, but you can store them with the little screw tops on, but you also don't have to, because this is going to be sealed tightly unless it's disturbed at some point. If you're shipping them or transporting them somewhere, you definitely want to transport them with the screw top lid on, and then keep them in a cool and dry place, and they don't necessarily need to go in the refrigerator if you've done it properly. So some different uses for jam, obviously, aside from spreading it on your toast, you can put it in various desserts, just like this trifle here. You can put it in your cake. You can fill tarts with it. You can use it for savory applications. So many different things you can do with your jam. Here's that list I was trying to look for before. Here's all the different things that you can look for when you're canning at home. So anyway, this presentation is attached to the class page. So that's there if you want to look at it. But for this week, all you need to do is cook down that fruit, 15, 20, 25 minutes, and let it cool and package it up for us properly. Maybe save it. If it lasts long enough, you can use it later in the term, maybe for your final project. But it's very important that you're putting it in a clean container and you're not touching it. If you made a whole bunch of jam and you're like thinking that you want to use it for your family's meal times over the next several weeks, but you also want to have some to use for your your final couple projects in class, I would package a little bit in a separate container that with a label that you're not going to be opening. A separate container with its own lid, maybe wrap it a couple times in plastic wrap, keep it in the way back of the fridge, that way nobody touches it, because as soon as that lid is popped open and something touches it, it's become contaminated and it might not last as long as you want it to. What else? How come nobody has anything to say? Is it me?
They're prepared. They're saying we're in advanced contemporary pastry art, chef.
We're just listening and paying attention.
Okay, that's good. I just wonder.
Well, I'm excited to check out your jam this week, you guys. I've seen your faces before, so what that means is I already know what you guys are capable of. The bar is already set high for all of you, so I'm excited to see what you turn in this week.
So this is a talented class?
Yes.
Good. That's good. That makes it more interesting for us. Sometimes I like to see assignments that actually make me feel bad about myself professionally. I like to look at things and be like, man, I can't even do that. And I have seen some. I'll tell you what, there was this lady in my last class that just finished up a couple days ago, and her stuff was like, I don't know why you're in school. I don't know why you're listening to me.
It looks like Gregory has a question.
Okay, go for it. Gregory?
You're muted right now, Gregory. Let me see if I can unmute. There we go. Now we can.
They do?
Yeah, we can hear it. Well, we didn't hear your question. You were on mute. Would you mind repeating it for us?
I'm sorry. Do they not put preservatives in jam?
Some Some do,
Some
but
do.
the biggest preservative in your jam is the sugar. That's why jams are usually really, really, really high in sugars, because that's an antimicrobial. Now, if you find jams that are like low sugar or sugar-free, those are probably going to have some sort of chemical preservatives in them. But generally, classic made jams and jellies have so much sugar in them that is a natural preservative. And the canning process. If the canning process was done right, there's no reason for added preservatives, because it's been canned and it's going to last for a long time with the lid on.
Okay. Okay. Cool. All right.
I had a lot of questions in my, sorry. I was going to say I had a lot of questions in my last class about how much extra pectin do we add if we're going to add extra pectin. That's more of an advanced thing. What we want you to do right now is just make the jam the way the formula indicates, and then from there, you would say, oh, my jam just wasn't as thick as I wanted it to, and then you can experiment. There are some ratios that I can provide you with some information on, but for now, we don't really want to get into mixing more pectin in. We just want you to cook down the fruit. You can look at that slideshow I showed you, so you can see the different types of fruit and their natural amounts of pectin, if you want to have a thicker jam or a thinner jam. But I would just ask that you do the basic formula first before we get into adding, more pectin that wasn't already in the fruit. Somebody chimed in. Was that a question?
I believe it was Yvonne. Yvonne, do you have a question? Maybe not, but this is a good opportunity for me to remind you all that Chef Jeannie and I love questions. Please never feel like you can't reach out to us. That is what we are here for. We want to help whenever and wherever we can. So even questions like, let's say, as we get farther on, our assignments are going to take longer and longer. Let's say you have like a really crazy work week and you don't know how you're going to get it all done in time. Reach out to us. We will be able to help you break the assignment up into more manageable chunks. That way you can still get it in by the deadline. We are here to help you with all sorts of things, not just necessarily ingredient-related questions. So we are resources for you.
That's a good point. One of my favorite things to do in the kitchen is create production lists, because I like to check things off as I go. But it's hard for me to work without having a list of steps of, what I should do first and what I can wait on and what can wait till the last minute. And that becomes especially crucial in the industry, knowing, what can be made ahead of time and what has, a moderate amount of, life in it, aside from what you have to make the last minute. So production lists are really important. If you do need help with that, you can let me know, and I have a template that I can share with you, and I can kind of walk you through it a couple times so that you know how it works and what you should do. I think Paula asked a question in the chat about will it get thick and when it cools down. Just like anything else, when it's hot, it's going to feel looser and more liquidy. And when it's cold, it's going to thicken up. Even something like mashed potatoes. You make mashed potatoes and they're nice and hot and kind of loose. And as they start to cool down on your plate, they get all like, thick and gross. Your jam's not going to be thick and gross. It's going to be thick and delicious. But it's supposed to be served cold or a little bit less than room temperature. Jam's not usually served hot unless it's on the back of meat or something. But that's part of the cooking process, is actually letting it cool down. So you won't be able to figure out how thick it is until it's cooled. Now, if it's in your pot and you're wondering, is this thick enough? Should I cook it more to remove some more of the water, or whatever, what's it going to be like when it's cool? You can remove it from the heat. Take a little spoon out, spread it onto a plate, and just let it cool at room temperature for 5 or 10 minutes, and just see what it's like when it's cool. While the rest of it is still in the pot, you could add it back to the stove if you want to. You don't have to cool it all down at one time to determine whether it's thick enough. You can take out a little sample portion and cool it down so you can see. Does that make sense? Willie says, with the apples, do you need to remove the apples when making jam, or how do you make it when it comes to apples? What do you mean remove the apples? You mean remove the skins? Probably.
So with apples, there are a couple of different ways. You could do like an apple jelly where you're doing like a small dice of your apples, cooking them down in the pot just like you would with any other berries. You can also do an apple butter, which involves macerating the apples and then cooking them down with your sugar, which is going to create a smoother consistency. But with apples, I would just say make sure you're dicing them small enough that they're similar sizes to berries. And they're going to require being cooked down for a little bit longer because they're a firmer fruit to begin with.
That's true. You can see on this chart here that underripe apples have higher levels of pectin, and then riper apples have moderate levels of pectin. But just like Chef said, they have a low water activity in them. They're not quite as wet as other fruits. So they are going to require cooking a little bit longer to break them down, but not to the point where they start burning in the pot. Now, with regards to removing the skins, you can remove the skins and then you won't have skins, but if that was something that you wanted, the skins don't necessarily have to be removed, but then you're not going to have like a smooth jam. You're going to have more of a chunky jam that's got skins in it, but that's not the end of the world. It just depends on what you want it to be like. Maybe you want skins in there, maybe you don't. I would just suggest that if you are putting the apples with skins in there, you chop the apples up really good first. Don't just put like large slices of apples, because then you're going to have like long peels of skins. And then they're going to like curl up into like little scrolls, and you're going to have weird little apple skin scrolls in your jam. Personally, I would remove the skin, but as far as the formula goes, you don't have to remove the skin of the apples.
One more question from Gregory.
Notice that she mentioned something about the strawberries and the blueberry, the seeds and stuff. Okay, how do you get rid of the seeds?
If you want to remove the seeds, you can do that actually before you cook it. If you were to kind of blend them up, like if you took the fruit and you blended it up and ran it through a strainer first to get the seeds out, or you could remove it at the end of the cooking process by running it through a strainer. Either way, you have to run it through a strainer to get the seeds out. So you could do it before you cook it or after you cook it. I would advise you to do it before you cook it, because before you cook it, the mixture of fruit is going to be a little bit more loose and liquidy, to the point where the actual fruit pulp itself is not going to get stuck in the strainer. The seeds will get stuck in the strainer. But if you wait till after you cook it, it's going to be thick. And then when you try to pass it through a strainer, you're going to end up with a lot of your product, in addition to the seeds, being stuck in the strainer. You don't necessarily have to strain out all the seeds, but with things like Chef said, of like raspberries and blackberries, it's best to try to remove at least some of the seeds, because there's a ton of seeds in those two fruits, and they tend to get bitter during the cooking process.
Okay.
And that is, oh, go ahead, Chef.
I was going to say, if you're worried about it, just make a jam with like that doesn't have a lot of seeds in it, like blueberries or something. Blueberries, apples, even a vegetable. What else? Crystal says you can leave the seeds in. Sure, you can leave the seeds in. I mean, it's really up to you. It's up to you on what you want it to look like and what you want it to taste like. We're just wanting you to actually make jam. We want you to show us the steps, make a product, regardless of whether you want seeds or not.
I'm getting some cool ideas down here in the chat too, which I love. I love when you guys are creative. But I would say we don't want to get too creative right off the bat. We want to make sure, we don't want to dive into recipe testing just yet. So trying to stick with things that you're a little bit more familiar with this first time around is always going to, I think, give you more success.
Yep. Just remember, in this program, we're trying to teach you techniques. And after you learn the technique is when you can go off and experiment with the technique. But you don't do that backwards. You don't experiment and then learn the technique. First you learn the technique and then you experiment. But that being said, you're welcome to use, like we said, you're welcome to use any type of fruit or vegetable. You can use any formula. If you look at the actual ball website, let me see if I can find it. I'll screen share. We're gonna look up the ball jars. Ball jars, where is it? What is the recipe? The mason jars, ball.com. There it is. Maybe not. Anyway, the website for the ball jars has, I'm going to find it and I'm going to attach it to the page, but there's an actual tab. As soon as you open the website, it's going to have a tab for recipes. And that's probably the most popular website for using to find jam recipes, because that's like what they do, the ball jar people. So I'll find the website and attach it to the class page so that you can have it. As soon as you open it up, there's a tab that says recipes, and just click on the tab, click on the type of fruit or vegetable you want to use, and you should be able to find the formulas there. That being said, they might be formulas that call for additional pectin. Ours doesn't, but if you're going to go out and use other recipes or other formulas, just be aware that the formula may or may not call for additional pectin, and that you're welcome to do that. You're welcome to use formulas that call for additional pectin, but you don't have to. Now, when you're using pectin, the way you use it is you actually mix the pectin powder with sugar. You never just dump the pectin right into the fruit or the liquid that you're putting it into, because it's going to clump up. So let's say you had a pound of fruit and a pound of sugar and a tablespoon of pectin. You would take a little bit of that sugar out, maybe 2 to 3 tablespoons of the sugar. You would mix it with the pectin. So then you would take the fruit and the rest of the sugar, put it in the pot, start cooking it, bring it up to a boil, and then you would take that sugar and pectin mixture that you have all mixed up, and you would add it to the pot as the liquid is boiling. That's how you use pectin. And pectin has to be brought to a full boil in order for it to gellify the way that it's supposed to. But if you just dump the pectin in without mixing with a little bit of sugar first, it's not going to work right. It's going to get all clumpy, and you're going to have little balls of pectin balls floating around in your jam. That's not good. Well, if there's nothing else, we'll get going, and we'll see you next time. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions, and we look forward to seeing your creations, and just be really creative. Thanks everybody for coming. All right. Well, you guys have a great day. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.